Hello, I'm Kaiser, and welcome to Moose Reads. Today I am going to do the first in my dedicated reviews to the books that I read in October. But I'm going to cheat a little bit, because the first book that I read in October was the sixth book in a series that not many people are likely to have heard of. So even though the books in a romance series are usually fairly interchangeable, and you can technically read any one of them on its own without missing much, I don't want to review this sixth book without the others. Also, with this particular series, there is a bit more of a through line than most, so it's probably better to just go over all of them. So I'm going to go ahead and review the entire series, even though I only read one of them in October. I read the other 5 in September, so I have read them all. There's no reason I can't do a review. And it's going to be a combined review covering all 6 books. I'd like to say, before I get started, that the opinions that I give here are my own opinions. They are extremely subjective. If I disliked a book, it is not a reflection on the author, and it is not a reflection on the people who do like it. Different people have different tastes, and that's okay. Alright, let's get into it. The series is called The Lords of Bucknall Club by A.J. Rock and Lisa Henry. It is comprised of 6 queer Regency romances. To start, I'm going to go over how the authors get around the fact that being queer was a crime in Regency England. There isn't a lot of overlap between queer romance and Regency romance because of this. Most of the queer Regency romances I've read, which is not many, take a more realistic approach. The characters know what they are doing is a risk, and they take steps to be discreet. Not this series. In this series, at the beginning of every book, they have a little paragraph that says, in 1783, the Marriage Act Amendment was introduced in England to allow marriages between same-sex couples. This was done to strengthen the law of primogeniture and to encourage childless unions in younger sons and daughters of the peerage, as an excess of lesser heirs might prove burdensome to a thinly spread inheritance. It is wildly ahistorical, but it is a nice way to allow for a queer romance with all of the Regency trappings without having to shoulder the weight of oppressive homophobia. It's fiction. I think as long as we acknowledge that this is a complete fabrication, there's no harm in having some fun. The first book in the Lords of Bucknall Club series is called A Husband for Hartwell. The description says, he must marry or risk his fortune. The whole of London society has long assumed Lord William Hartwell will marry his childhood best friend, Lady Rebecca Warrington. After 2 seasons, Hartwell remains quite content with bachelorhood. His parents do not. When Hartwell learns they intend to cut his purse strings unless he makes a match this season, he resigns himself to a marriage of convenience with Becca, and yet he can't help but be drawn to her younger brother, Worry. He must marry or risk his sister's ruin. The Viscount Worry Warrington is used to being viewed as the tag-along little brother. Now a grown man about to enter his 2nd season, Worry is desperate to be seen. When Lord Balfour, a handsome older peer, takes Worry under his wing, Worry thinks his dream is finally coming true, until Balfour reveals his true intent, to make public a letter that will destroy Becca's reputation, unless Worry agrees to marry him. Time is running out for both of them. When an injury forces Worry to recover at Hartwell House, the two succumb to a secret flirtation, but Worry's sudden announcement of his engagement to Balfour drives Hartwell near mad with jealousy, and right into Rebecca's arms. With the clock ticking for Worry to save his sister, will Hartwell discover the truth of Worry's feelings before it's too late? I got this book for free from BookBub. It sounded pretty good to me. I like queer romance, I like Regency romance, so I thought I might like this. And I did. I enjoyed this book a lot. I gave it 4 stars. It probably would have been 5 stars, but there were 2 things that happened that dragged it down for me. Both of these things are spoilers, however, so from this point on, the review for the first book will have spoilers. If you do not want any spoilers at all, skip to the next book. There should be a note on the screen directing you to that timestamp in case you, like me, watch these videos on a TV. My biggest problem with this book is that Worry never comes to rely on Hartwell. Usually in these kinds of romances, the character will have a secret and be too afraid to tell the person they love, but eventually they reach a point where they can't keep lying to their partner, or they can't hide the truth anymore, and they tell them. And then, inevitably, the partner understands and helps them either resolve the problem or overcome the guilt they feel. It's a partnership. That's kind of the point. Worry does not do this. From the very beginning of the book, Worry is convinced that if he tells either his sister Rebecca or Hartwell that he took this letter in the first place, let alone let it get stolen, they will never forgive him. So he spends the book stubbornly refusing to tell anyone what is happening, and it frustrated me. At first, he's only being blackmailed for money, so I understand his reluctance to admit his mistake. It was wrong to steal the letter, it was wrong to keep it. If he can resolve it without anyone knowing, of course he's going to. But it doesn't take long before the man who actually stole the letter gives it to Balfour, who is his associate, and then Balfour uses it to force Worry into marriage. And again, I can kind of understand why Worry hesitates to ask for help. He's still sure he won't be forgiven, and the stakes, while very upsetting, are not wholly intolerable. Up until Balfour blackmails him, Worry liked Balfour. He looked up to him, he may have been somewhat attracted to him. So even though being blackmailed into marriage has made him feel, rightfully, less friendly to Balfour, it doesn't seem like the worst thing in the world. Balfour is well situated, and Worry might have agreed to marry him without the blackmail, so it's not ideal, but it's not the end of the world. But it becomes increasingly obvious that Balfour isn't just a kind of bad person, but a truly odious human being. Once he no longer feels any need to seduce Worry, he makes it very clear that he intends to own him and use him as he pleases, and that Worry is expected to submit completely. So Worry realizes that he absolutely cannot marry this man, and where most romance protagonists would finally give in and share their secret and ask for help, Worry chooses a much more stupid path. Instead of realizing that he is in so far over his head that he can't get himself out, Worry decides to negotiate a different bargain with Balfour. I'm not going to give away the specifics, but the deal he made was incredibly stupid. He offers something that he thinks Balfour would prefer that is still awful for himself, so that he doesn't have to marry this terrible man. But because Balfour holds all the cards when he makes this bargain, I spent the entire climax of the book wondering why Balfour would ever hold up his end once he got what he wanted. And Worry never seemed to consider that a man who was willing to steal and blackmail a person might also be willing to break a deal. Obviously, things get resolved before Worry can go through with his stupid plan. Hartwell manages to pull his head out of his ass at the last minute and realize there's something wrong, and he comes to the rescue. So we never get to see what Balfour would have done, but it was very disappointing that Hartwell had to figure it out on his own instead of being told. The other thing that irritated me is a much smaller complaint. At some point in the book, Worry starts hinting at something Hartwell said or did at a rout that was needlessly cruel and that he thinks proves Hartwell doesn't respect him. This is one of the things that is used to prevent Worry from trusting Hartwell. And when we finally find out what Hartwell said, because it is something he said, I did feel like it was a step too far. It wasn't the kind of egregious violation that would have made it impossible to root for the romance, but it did make it more difficult. What happened was that Worry met Balfour at this rout, and they were kind of flirting because Worry didn't know Balfour was terrible yet, and Balfour was still working on manipulating him. And Hartwell saw them flirting and got jealous. And I can understand a character getting a bit snippy in this situation, that's pretty standard fare. But, like I said, Hartwell crossed a line. They're heading out to do something in a group of their peers, and Hartwell says something that basically implies, because Worry really likes animals, that he wants to fuck them. Which was a terrible thing to say in private, but is just unbelievably unkind to say in public. And I really didn't like that. Eventually, Worry brings this up to Hartwell. He doesn't state the specifics, so Hartwell does have to remember exactly what he said himself, and to his credit, he does. So he apologizes, but I really would have, given that he said the thing, preferred if he had remembered independently and apologized without prompting. Because Hartwell does mention multiple times that Worry has been different since that rout, so he could have remembered what he said and been remorseful, but that didn't happen. So like I said, I liked this book, but because of those two things, it was a 4 and not a 5 for me. The second book in the series is called A Case for Christmas. It is not a Christmas novel. The character was born on Christmas, and so he was named Christmas. Christmas Gale, because his last name is Gale. It is a ridiculous name, and I think the authors were having a bit of fun. Although, I do believe it could have been a real name at the time. But the description for this says, "He loves no one and never will. Lord Christmas Gale is a genius and a misanthrope, and, quite to his disgust, adored by all of society for his capacity to solve mysteries. When a man approaches him seeking help in locating a lost dog, Gale rebuffs him. But what begins with a missing dog ends in murder and intrigue, two of Gale's favorite things. If it weren't for that orphan that comes attached to them. Oh, and Benjamin Chant. He has sworn never to love again. The Honorable Mr. Benjamin Chant isn't sure how he got swept up in Gale's mad investigation, but there's something intriguing about the man, a vulnerability that most of the world doesn't notice, but which captures Chant's interest and his sympathy from their first meeting. After a disastrous love affair in the past, Chant has sworn to never give his heart away again, especially to a man who does not want it. But it isn't just their hearts at stake. When their investigation takes a dangerous turn and their lives are threatened, both Gale and Chant are forced into the realization that perhaps two imperfect men might fit perfectly together. That is, if they can outwit the killer who is intent on seeing them both dead. I don't have much to say about this one. I gave it 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. Gale was introduced in the previous book. He's one of Hartwell's best friends. I liked him in that book. So I was looking forward to this book, and it did not disappoint. I liked Chant as well. Unlike the first book, this book was very much a partnership. Gale often does investigations, and early on he invites Chant to join him, because Chant is more sociable and he's retrieving a child from a bad neighborhood. And Chant is very adamant that Gale not investigate without him. And because Gale is falling in love with Chant, he mostly obeys. I'm fairly certain that Gale is meant to be autistic in this book. I can't say for sure because I am not well versed in autism, but he aligns with what I have heard. He fixates on solving problems, he gets into moods where he doesn't like to be touched, he has some degree of social anxiety, and he doesn't always understand social cues and social rules. So if you like that kind of character, here's a good book. There aren't really any spoiler thoughts on this one. It was just good. So the third book is called A Rival for Rivingdon. The description says, "He must marry well to secure his fortune." The Honorable Loftus Rivingdon is poised to make his debut into society. He's beautiful, charming, and quite the catch of the season. If only he could find the right hat. With the zealous assistance of his doting mother, Loftus has one ambition only, to meet and marry a wealthy peer. And Loftus knows just the peer, the dauntingly handsome, infinitely fashionable Viscount Soulden. Good thing there's nothing standing in his way. He must also marry well to secure his fortune. The Honorable Morgan Notley is poised to make his debut into society. He's beautiful, charming, and quite the catch of the season. And he has just found the perfect hat. With the zealous assistance of his doting mother, Morgan has one ambition only, to meet and marry a wealthy peer. And Morgan knows just the peer, the dauntingly handsome, infinitely fashionable Viscount Soulden. Good thing there's nothing standing in his Damn it all to hell. Their ambitions collide. When Loftus and Morgan both set their sights on Soulden, the rivalry of the season begins. Their mutual hatred escalates into spite, sabotage, and scandal, as all of society eagerly waits to see which diamond of the first water will prevail. Except that the course of true loathing, just like true love, never did run smooth. The harder they try to destroy each other, the closer they come to uncovering each other's deepest vulnerabilities, and the more difficult it becomes to deny the burning attraction between them. I didn't like this one. I really didn't like this one. I did give it 3 stars, though. But I didn't like this one because the boys are preening dandies with very little happening between their ears. They want to be the prettiest boy, and that's really all there is to them. I'm not here for it. The authors did try to give them some depth. They gave us glimpses into how the boys got to be this way and the insecurities they feel because of it, but they back away from that a lot, and there just wasn't enough to overcome how vapid and shallow they come across for most of the book. And they don't improve when we see them in subsequent books either. There was one thing I really liked in this book. It's a mild spoiler. I'm going to strip it of any context, but you've been warned. When the two of them finally have sex for the first time, they are both virgins. They have no experience at all and no education. The only exposure that they've had to sex up to this point is reading a series called The Maiden Diaries that has been making the rounds in society. It is, as far as I can tell, the filthiest kind of erotica, and so they aren't even sure how much of it is plausible. So when they have sex, neither of them knows what they're doing, and it's awkward. But they kind of laugh about it, and they figure it out. And I really liked that. Usually in these books, the characters always have the sexiest, most pleasurable sex imaginable for their first time. And it was nice to see a relationship where that wasn't the case, but that didn't mean they didn't enjoy it. So that was Arrival for Rivingdon. I should say that while I didn't enjoy this one, that doesn't mean it's bad. That's true in general, obviously, but I want to note that specifically on this one. I didn't like the characters. They weren't the kinds of characters I enjoy, and they aren't characters I can relate to. But setting the characters aside, this was a fun book. The plot was pretty good, and it was enjoyable to read. I saw at least one person say that this was their favorite. So if the series sounds interesting to you, don't go into it thinking that this one is terrible. It was just very much not for me specifically, because I didn't like the protagonists. The fourth book is A Sanctuary for Soulden, which says, "He wasn't meant for a quiet life. Philip Winthrop, Viscount Soulden, is a fop, an idle popinjay with nothing more on his mind than how to best knot his cravat. He definitely doesn't spy against the French, or arrange hasty weddings, or occasionally commandeer the navy, and he certainly doesn't seek out mortal danger in order to combat his pervasive ennui. It's all just a big misunderstanding when he's shot by a French intelligence officer during a merry riverside chase. And what a wonderful bit of quick thinking to pretend to be a corpse in order to get himself taken to the local surgeon's autopsy cellar. The French will never find him there, if the French are even looking for him, which they're not. Now he just needs to locate a way out before this surgeon fellow attempts to dissect him. He'd rather deal with the dead than the living. Surgeon Edmund Fernside does his best to heal the living, but in truth he'd much rather look into the gaping chest cavity of a corpse than into the startling blue eyes of a corpse that just climbed off his autopsy table. Well then, Lord Soulden is clearly a man with some complicated secrets, but with the French in hot pursuit and a rather brutal gunshot wound, Soulden's not going anywhere anytime soon, and Fernside discovers that he enjoys the pleasure of his company, in more ways than one. Now, trusting each other could mean the difference between life and death. As Soulden learns to be still for the first time in his life, Fernside wonders if perhaps it's time to spread his wings a little. They can only hide from the outside world, and from their pasts, for so long before the secrets they've uncovered about each other strain the growing attraction between them. Each man must decide whether a life of comfortable lies is preferable to one of difficult truths, and whether the sanctuary they've created together is something worth fighting for. This is another one that there's not much to say about. I loved this book. I gave it 5 stars. I liked Soulden, I liked Fernside, I liked their romance. There is one thing I really liked that I want to highlight. Pretty early on, Soulden starts blatantly flirting with Fernside. He's attracted to him, but he's also kind of trying to distract him, so he lays it on real thick. And from what we've learned about Fernside at this point, I expected him to shy away from that with a lot of blushing and fumbling. But he does not. He gives as good as he gets, and I thought that was great. Also, with regards to representation, Fernside is fat. He doesn't describe himself as fat, instead he uses all the euphemisms we've invented to avoid saying fat, but he describes himself that way, and Soulden also says that Fernside is heavier set, but that he likes someone he can grab onto. So if that appeals to you, you might like this. Also, Soulden is bisexual. He was married to a woman before, and part of his secret/dark past is that she died and it messed him up. Which brings us to the one mild complaint I have for this book. The complaint is absolutely rife with spoilers, so here's the warning. Spoiler talk starts now. So when we find out Soulden was married, we learn that she died in childbirth. And for most of the book, there's a bit of a question mark there. They talk about how there was a lot of blood, but they don't state explicitly what happened to the child. Until the very end, when Soulden asks Fernside to accompany him to his father's house to visit the child. He was so torn up by his wife's and then his brother's deaths that he has left his son to his father's care. He wasn't prepared to love someone again, and he's been a neglectful father. I don't love that about him, but it's fine. But it did leave me a little wanting that we learn about his son right at the end. We get a couple of scenes of them trying to get used to each other and get to know each other. It ends on a sort of hopeful, there's promise here note. And I would have liked just a little more resolution on that front. I realize there's only so much you can do in one book, but that doesn't stop me from feeling a bit disappointed. And the boy isn't mentioned in subsequent books either. Obviously, those books aren't about Soulden and Fernside, but they do appear, and they are seemingly without child. So I wanted more from that, I guess. I still give it 5 stars, though, so obviously the one nitpick wasn't enough to tank my enjoyment. The 4th book is called An Affair for Aumont. The description says, all he wants is the love he lost. 4 years ago, Louis Charles Aumont, the Marquis de Montespan, chose duty over the man he loved. And then the man he loved chose death in service to England. Now, after finally cutting ties with his king, Aumont is living in a slum in Seven Dials and intending to die there too. But when Bow Street runner George Darling shows up at his door with a strange proposition, Aumont is intrigued by the prospect of something, anything, that might make him feel alive again, or at least provide the funds he needs to drink himself to death. All he wants is the love he couldn't have. George Darling joined the Bow Street officers out of a belief in order. He accepts no bribes, indulges in no vices, and tries very hard not to dream above his station. If only Lord Christmas Gale hadn't put that last one to such a test. Now that turning his thoughts from Lord Christmas only lands them instead on the handsome Frenchman with whom he recently crossed paths, Darling is more determined than ever to keep his head down and focus on his duty. Until a knock on his door sends his life into disarray. Teddy Honeyfield, a former companion of Lord Christmas's, is in need of a temporary bodyguard. Darling would never pass as the sort of gentleman Teddy requires, but he knows someone who might. Neither wants to take a chance on a love that can never be. When Aumont and Darling join forces to help Teddy, they're not expecting to risk their hearts as well as their lives. Darling's striking looks remind Aumont quite painfully of the man he's lost, and Aumont's title reminds Darling he has no right to desire a nobleman. But the rising threat soon drives them to flee with Teddy to the country, a journey that puts them face to face with their pasts, while showing them a chance for happiness is within reach, if only they are courageous enough to grab it. I also liked this book. I gave this 5 stars. It was kind of a sucker punch, honestly. Darling was mentioned a bit in A Case for Christmas because he often works with Gale, and then he was involved at the end of A Sanctuary for Soulden because he's a police officer and there was some crime happening, but he was mostly a non-entity. And then Aumont was introduced pretty much at the end of A Sanctuary for Soulden, so while these two characters were technically on my radar, I didn't have any idea what to expect from them. But they were lovely. I guess I don't really know how to talk about books I like. The couple was cute, they worked well together. Well, I suppose it would be more accurate to say that they complemented each other. There was a fair degree of contention between them. They pushed each other in ways that were generally positive and nice to read. There was one thing I really enjoyed about this book. This can be considered a mild spoiler, but it's also the kind of information that a lot of romance will tell you up front, so I'm not gonna cordon it off. And that's that they don't have sex in this book. Darling is a very rigid, follows the rules kind of guy, and the rules say you can't have sex until you're married. So Darling, despite being very attracted to Aumont and wanting to have sex with him, is unwilling to compromise his values. And Aumont respects that. Don't get me wrong, I have nothing against sex in these books. I just also enjoyed that this series has a whole range of relationships, and this was one of them. It was nice to have a book where the character doesn't want to have premarital sex and not see that mocked or belittled, and also not have it be an overtly religious book. Because usually the clean romances feel like they're coming from a very Christian, kind of Puritan perspective where premarital sex is bad. And this is absolutely not that. So it was nice. Also, Aumont is an alcoholic. He's been through some shit, he's had enough, and he's drinking himself to death. Darling's mother is also an alcoholic who has been sober for something like 5 years, so Darling knows how hard recovery can be, he knows how to help, and he's there for Aumont as he tries to piece himself back together. And then, as a fun little side bonus, Teddy also gets a resolution in the story that I also thought was cute. Last up is A Scandal for Stratford. This is the book I actually read in October. The description says, he has all he could ask for. James Lewis, the Earl of Stratford, has precisely what he wants. A quiet existence on his family estate, a thriving horse trade that leaves him plenty of time to work on the final volume of his anonymously published opus, The Maiden Diaries, and a deeply committed, albeit unconventional, relationship with his stablemaster, Harold Granger. While the shy, awkward Earl can barely manage a word in London society, with Harold he can share anything. He wouldn't change a thing. Harold Granger knows what he and James risk by loving one another. James's reputation as an eccentric recluse would be twisted into something far worse if anyone learned he was carrying on an affair with a servant. Worse still, if anyone learned that Harold puts the Earl on his knees and delivers the welts and bruises James begs for. But when it's just the two of them, everything feels so perfectly right, and Harold is determined to remain a safe harbor to James no matter what. But a storm is fast approaching. Their determination to protect each other is put to the test when James's volatile younger brother Frederick returns from a decade abroad, nursing grudges from the past. When Frederick stumbles upon James's secrets, he sees a means to rid himself of his brother and reclaim his own place in society. His scheming forces James and Harold from their idyllic life and into a web of treachery that can only be untangled by the Bucknall Club circle, if the two of them can let themselves trust these newfound friendships the way they trust each other. This might have been my favorite of the series. It's hard to say for sure, I really loved the last 3, but I think this one wins. Obviously, that means I gave it 5 stars. Harold and Stratford were very good together. They understood each other well, and they loved each other deeply. You can tell from the description, they're already together at the beginning of this book. They've been together for several years, or most of their lives, depending on what you count. They're into BDSM. I've never read a BDSM book before, so I was a little worried I wouldn't enjoy this. But I liked the way it was portrayed in this. I still suspect that it's not a genre for me in general, but I can at least enjoy some of it. But if you like BDSM, there's a fair amount of it in this. Stratford has extreme social anxiety, so if you want to read a story about that, this is good. He doesn't talk much to people, and he's uncomfortable going to London and participating in the season. And, like most of the things in this book that are usually stigmatized and belittled, the people around him are very understanding. Worry especially tries to treat him very gently and not push him to talk when he doesn't want to. Also, Stratford is non-binary. He is writing the erotica that everyone has been reading throughout these books, and he starts writing a character that is sometimes a man, sometimes a woman, and when he describes this to Harold, he says, like me. And later in the book, he buys a dress with the help of a very lovely and discreet tailor. I will say, I feel like this wasn't a very strong element of this book. It's mentioned a few times, but it doesn't have much of a presence. Still, if you like non-binary characters, you might appreciate that. I will give one spoiler for this, because I love it so much. It is a major spoiler, it plays into the resolution of the book. So if you don't want to hear any spoilers at all, now is the time to skip ahead, mute, or click away. And since this is the last book, really, just close out the video. So, for context, at some point in this book, Stratford and his brother Frederick go to London. Stratford doesn't really want to go But they have a rocky relationship and he wants to try to make amends. So he goes. Then Frederick finds out a few of the many secrets Stratford is keeping and decides to use them against him. He locks him in his room, intending to pass him off as crazy and therefore unfit to be Earl. Harold realizes Stratford is in danger and rides to the rescue, but is unable to reach Stratford. So he goes to Worry, who he knows Stratford has sort of become friends with. Worry gathers the entire group, and they start talking about what to do. But the thing I absolutely adored was that Chant is there, and while the rest of them are waffling over what to do, he's just like, I know what to do. I'm going to kick his ass. And then he marches to Stratford's London home and punches Frederick in the face. Beautiful. Absolute champ. I adore him. So those are my thoughts on the 6 books in the Lords of Bucknall Club. Overall, I enjoyed them. I liked the last 3 the best. If they sound at all interesting to you, I highly recommend checking them out. They are all available on Kindle Unlimited if you have a subscription to that. Alternately, they are $4 each. Or, of course, you can always try your local library, but I wouldn't really expect to find them there. Thanks for watching. Hopefully you'll come back for future videos. Bye!